The surgeon suspected something unusual about the bride, and as soon as he lifted her dress, what would you do if, right in the middle of a wedding, a doctor suddenly stopped the ceremony and demanded to examine the bride? The hall fell into silence, the music cut off, the guests froze, and the groom turned pale as marble. Friends, before we continue, let's pause for a moment. Write in the comments which city you're from and how old you are. It's really valuable for us to know who's here with us right now. And now, let's return to our story. Enjoy! Surgeon Andrew Palmer sat in the third row, never intending to interfere with someone else's happiness. He had come as a friend of the groom's family, and truth be told, he was a little envious. The groom was handsome, a successful businessman. The bride looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, gentle, refined, with a mysterious smile. But something about her troubled Andrew. At first he thought it was just professional instinct, the doctor's eye that notices what others overlook. When the bride slowly climbed the steps, Andrew caught a strangeness in her walk. No, she wasn't limping. Rather, she moved too carefully, as if concealing pain. And then, the color of her skin. Beneath the thin layer of makeup, he could see paleness, a faint bluish tint on her lips. Maybe she's just nervous, he thought. But his inner voice whispered, no, this is more serious. The ceremony continued. The officiant spoke beautiful words. The groom held the bride's hand, but Andrew found himself looking not at their faces, but at her wrists. Too thin, too cold. And then, when the bride turned, the light fell just right, and he noticed a mark from a catheter on her ankle. He straightened sharply. A catheter on her wedding day? His heart raced. If it was what he thought, the girl could be in danger. "Excuse me." Andrew stood, hardly believing what he was doing. "Excuse me, may I have a moment?" All eyes turned to him. The groom frowned. "Andrew, what's going on?" "I'm a doctor," Andrew said quietly, but firmly. "I need to make sure your bride is all right."
The murmur in the hall grew louder. Someone gasped. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a ridiculous prank. But the bride suddenly turned even paler, her knees buckling. The groom managed to catch her, but Andrew was already there. "Step aside," he said quickly. "If I'm right, every second matters." He carefully lifted the hem of her dress and froze. A thin tube ran along her leg, disappearing beneath the fabric. It was connected to a portable pump hidden under the gown. "My God," Andrew breathed. "This is an infusion. You're undergoing chemotherapy?" The guests were speechless. The groom stared at the bride, confused and shaken. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to tell you before the wedding. I thought I could finish the course in time." But Andrew was already checking her blood pressure and pulse. They were critically low. "Call an ambulance now," he ordered the groom. "If the infusion stops, she could go into shock." The officiant, who just moments ago had been smiling, was already dialing 911. Chaos filled the hall. But Andrew was calm, habit from the operating room. "Hold on," he said to the bride, looking into her eyes. "You're stronger than you think." She tried to smile through her tears. "I just wanted one day to feel normal, beautiful." Her words struck the hall harder than thunder. Many guests turned away to hide their tears. The groom knelt beside her, taking her hand and whispering, "You're already the most beautiful to me." But Andrew knew this was only the beginning. They were all about to learn the truth the bride had hidden for months. The siren of the ambulance could already be heard in the distance, but for Andrew, time seemed to slow. He checked the IV, controlled her breathing, and felt the groom gripping her hand tighter and tighter. "I don't understand," the groom whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" The bride sobbed softly. "I didn't want to ruin our day. You did so much for the wedding. I wanted you to remember me happy."
This isn't the time to talk. Hold her head higher, her breathing must stay steady. When the paramedics finally rushed into the hall, they moved with practiced speed. In just a couple of minutes, the bride was gently transferred onto a stretcher. Guests stepped aside, many crying, while the groom walked beside her as pale as she was. "I'm going with her," he said firmly, "and no one will stop me." Andrew nodded. "I'm going too." Inside the ambulance, there was a deathly silence, broken only by the beeping of monitors and the hum of the engine. The bride's eyes remained closed, but she heard everything. "Condition stable but critical," one of the doctors said. "Good thing you noticed in time." Andrew only nodded. His hands trembled, and that angered him. He had seen dozens of severe cases, but this girl, she could have died before his eyes, in a white gown on her own wedding day. "What's her name?" he asked the groom. "Faith." "Faith," Andrew repeated quietly, as if committing it to memory. At the hospital, Faith was placed in a separate room. The first hours were the hardest. Andrew assisted his colleagues, supervised the treatment as if he were his personal patient. Only by dawn, when the crisis had finally passed, did he step out into the corridor and allow himself to exhale for the first time that night. The groom was still there on a chair, looking as if he hadn't blinked once. "Will she live?" he asked hoarsely. "She will," Andrew nodded, "but she needs to be monitored. Her condition is unstable, and the therapy cannot be interrupted." The groom covered his face with his hands. "Why didn't she tell me anything?" Andrew hesitated. "Sometimes people stay silent not because they don't trust you, but because they're afraid of losing the little they still have." The groom looked at him, and his eyes held everything: anger, pain, fear. "I need to know everything."
"First, let's wait until she wakes up. She must tell you herself." When Faith finally opened her eyes, the room was quiet. Early morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across the sheet. The groom sat nearby, while Andrew stood at the window. "You're still angry with me, aren't you?" she asked weakly. The groom raised his head sharply. I don't know what I feel, but I'm not leaving you." Faith lowered her gaze. "I was afraid that if I told you about the diagnosis, you'd cancel the wedding." "You're foolish," he said softly, but his voice carried tenderness. "I would have only taken you to the best doctor sooner." She began to cry, quietly, almost silently. Andrew came closer. "Faith," he said gently, "we need to know everything. You're undergoing chemotherapy, right? How long has it been?" 3 months. Leukemia. At first, it seemed manageable. Then the complications started. But I thought I could hold on until the wedding. The groom clenched his fists. "You shouldn't have hidden it. I wanted to give you 1 day without sickness, just a few hours." Andrew sighed. He had seen hundreds of patients hiding their diagnoses from loved ones, but this story touched him especially. Right now, the most important thing is not to blame each other. We have a difficult treatment ahead, but there are chances. "Chances?" Faith repeated. "Yes," Andrew nodded, "but only if you stop hiding your condition from us." A few hours later, Faith's parents arrived. The moment her mother stepped through the door, she broke down in tears. Her father scowled. "We told you the wedding could wait," he said sternly. "You're stubborn as always." "Dad," Faith answered softly, "I didn't want to cancel it. I wanted to feel alive." Andrew watched the scene, realizing that everyone was facing a serious trial. But he didn't yet know that this story held a secret none of them could imagine.
He had noticed a strange note in her medical history, something not directly related to leukemia treatment. Too strange to ignore. Later that night, Andrew sat at the duty doctor's desk, holding Faith's medical file. Page after page, analyses, prescriptions, records, and suddenly, his eyes caught a short note at the bottom of one page. Additional research. Blood samples sent to Laboratory X, awaiting genetic test results. Genetic test, he muttered. Why didn't anyone mention this? He knew such studies were ordered only in special cases, when rare forms of disease or hereditary mutations were suspected. So it's not that simple, he thought. At that moment, the door to the room opened quietly, and the groom entered. "Did you find something?" Andrew looked up. "It's too early to say. I need the test results." "And what does that mean?" "That Faith might have a rare form of leukemia. Treating her with standard methods could be dangerous." The groom grew even paler. "So, she might not survive the treatment?" "Not necessarily," Andrew replied, "but I need to know everything in detail." Meanwhile, in Faith's room, an argument broke out between her mother and father. "I told you we should have gone to Israel," her mother nearly shouted. "The clinics there are better, the doctors more experienced." "We did everything we could," her father snapped back. "She refused." "I didn't refuse. Faith tried to sit up against her pillow. I just didn't want to leave everyone. To leave him." She looked at the groom, who lowered his eyes. "And now what?" her mother said softly, clutching a handkerchief. "The wedding turned into a nightmare." "Mom," Faith said sharply, "you don't dare say that. It was the best day of my life, until I fainted." Her mother fell silent. The room grew heavy with tension.
Andrew returned with documents. "Arguments are useless now," he said firmly. "Faith needs calm, and we all need to wait for the test results." The next day, the long-awaited analyses arrived. Andrew opened the envelope and read a line that made his heart skip a beat. "Rare FLT3ITD mutation detected. Recommended protocol revision and transplantologist consultation." "Protocol revision," he muttered. The groom noticed how pale Andrew had become. "What is it?" "It means," Andrew said, "that Faith will most likely need a bone marrow transplant, and as soon as possible." The room fell silent. "Transplantation?" Faith repeated. "Is it dangerous?" "Yes," Andrew answered honestly, "but without it, the prognosis is worse." The groom sat beside her bed, taking her hand. "We'll get through this." Andrew looked at them and sighed. He had seen hundreds of families face the same, and he knew the hardest part was only beginning – the search for a donor. A few days later, Faith underwent typing for donor matching. The results were expected soon, and it was then that Andrew noticed another oddity. "John," Andrew said to the groom, "I need to ask you a strange question." "Ask?" Faith doesn't have any brothers or sisters, right?" "No, she's an only child." "Why?" "Because the chances of finding a donor are higher among relatives." "But," Andrew hesitated, "her file contains a note about some additional family." The groom frowned. "What does that mean? Additional family?" "That's exactly what I want to find out."
When Faith woke from her afternoon nap, Andrew sat beside her. "Faith, I need you to tell me everything you know." She was silent for a while. "You found the note in my file, didn't you?" "I did." Faith took a deep breath. "It's not a secret. We just rarely talk about it. I'm adopted." Her words hung in the air. "What?" the groom said in disbelief. "You never told me." "I only found out myself at 17, she said quietly.
Mom and Dad didn't want me to feel like an outsider, but my biological mother signed the adoption papers right after I was born. Andrew pressed his lips together. Then we have a chance to find your biological family. Maybe among them we'll find a compatible donor. You think they'd agree to help? Faith asked. I don't know, Andrew said honestly, but we have to try. That evening, Andrew called a lawyer friend and began filing requests through Child Services. He understood they had almost no time left, and the deeper he dug into the documents, the clearer it became. Faith's story might be far more complicated than anyone thought. And he didn't yet know that in searching for her biological family, he would uncover a secret that would change not only Faith's life, but his own as well. Andrew barely slept that night. Documents, calls, emails. He did everything he could to speed up the process of finding Faith's biological family. His old friend, the lawyer, phoned at dawn. Listen, I found something, but you're not going to like it. Tell me, Andrew said shortly. Faith's biological mother was underage when she gave birth. The case is sealed, but indirect evidence shows she's alive. And here's the strange part. 2 years ago, there's a note about a name change and relocation. She's hiding. Looks like it.
Andrew froze. Why would a woman who had once given up her child now try to disappear? In the morning, Andrew entered Faith's hospital room. She smiled at him, but her eyes were troubled. You found something, didn't you? Yes, he answered. We've traced your biological mother, but it seems she changed her name and residence. So she won't want to meet me, Faith said softly. Don't jump to conclusions, Andrew countered. The reason could be something else entirely. The groom, sitting by the window, stood suddenly. So are we going to find her or not? We will, Andrew said, but we have to be ready for any outcome. 2 days later, they traveled to a small town in Pennsylvania where the woman had last been seen. The house was empty. A neighbor, an elderly woman, opened the door and said she left 6 months ago, didn't tell anyone a thing, only left a letter. Andrew asked to see it. The woman produced an old envelope. On it was written, "If someone comes looking for me, tell them I cannot return." Inside was a short note. This is for her safety. For whose safety? Andrew whispered. The neighbor shrugged. I don't know. On the way back, the car was filled with oppressive silence. Safety, Faith repeated. What was she talking about? Maybe she got involved with someone dangerous, Andrew said. But that's just a guess. The groom slammed his fist against the steering wheel. We don't have time for guesses. Andrew wasn't offended by the outburst. He understood emotions were at their peak. We have another option, he said. We can request the DNA bank. If her sample is in the system, we might find her, or relatives.
Do it, Faith said without hesitation. The next day, Andrew received an answer from the database. A match had been found, but not with her mother. The system pointed to a man named Arthur Sullivan, living in a neighboring state. Paternal match, the report said. My father? Faith breathed. Possibly, Andrew nodded. Or a half-brother. The groom frowned. And what now? Now we need to find him and talk. They met Arthur in a small cafe. He was tall, with a weary look in his eyes. I suspected this day would come, he said, gazing at Faith. You look so much like our mother. Ours? Faith asked in shock. Yes, he nodded. I had a hard conversation with her, too. She was afraid her past would catch up to her. What past? Andrew asked. Arthur was silent for a moment, then leaned closer. Our father was tied to organized crime. Mom ran from him when I was a teenager. She feared his people would find her and the baby. So she left. To protect me, Faith said quietly. Exactly, Arthur nodded. But I'm willing to help. If my bone marrow is a match, I'll donate tomorrow. Andrew felt a spark of hope, but then he reminded himself genetic similarity didn't guarantee compatibility. First, we need to run the tests. 2 days later, the results came. Arthur was a match. When Andrew told Faith, she smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. So, I have a chance? Yes, Andrew said, and a good one.
But the joy didn't last long. That evening, Andrew received an anonymous text message on his phone. Stop digging. This isn't your business. If you don't, you'll regret it. He showed the message to the groom. That's a threat, the groom said. So Faith's past really is dangerous. Andrew frowned. But I won't back off. We'll see this through to the end. He didn't yet know that the coming night would be a turning point, not only for Faith, but for himself. The night was restless. Andrew barely closed his eyes. The threat from the day before wouldn't leave his mind. He checked his phone every hour, almost expecting more. And the next message came. At 3 in the morning, the groom called. Faith is gone. His voice was hoarse. Her room is empty. The nurses saw nothing. Andrew jumped to his feet. Call security. I'm on my way. The hospital was in turmoil when he arrived. The duty doctor looked pale. The surveillance cameras were down for 10 minutes. No one realized how. Andrew clenched his fists. Then it wasn't an accident. The groom paced the corridor like a caged animal. If something happens to her, we'll find her, Andrew said. But we need to stay cold-headed. 2 hours later, another anonymous text arrived. If you want to see her alive, come alone. Address below. Andrew showed the message to the groom. You're staying here. Are you insane? If it's a trap, one person has better chances of getting her out. She needs you here if I don't come back. The groom clenched his teeth, but nodded. The address led Andrew to the outskirts of town, to an abandoned warehouse. Inside it was dark and smelled of damp. Faith! He called.
Here, came a weak voice. He rushed toward the sound and found her tied to a chair, but alive. It's all right, he said, freeing her hands. I'll get you out. But as soon as they stood, 2 men stepped out of the shadows. Doctor, one of them said, you're far too curious. Andrew placed himself between them and Faith. What do you want? For you to stay out of things that don't concern you. She's my patient, Andrew said firmly, and I won't abandon her. The men exchanged looks. One pulled out a knife. Andrew's heart pounded so loudly it seemed they must hear it. If you hurt her, he said, you won't get a chance to walk away. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then suddenly headlights blazed. The police had arrived. The groom, breaking their agreement, had called for help after all. The men tried to flee, but were caught. Let's go, Andrew said, helping Faith out. We need to get you back to the hospital. The bone marrow transplant surgery was scheduled a week later. Arthur donated without hesitation, and the procedure went smoothly. Andrew stood behind the glass, watching as Faith slowly woke up from anesthesia. She made it, he whispered to the groom. Because of you, the groom replied. If it hadn't been for you, not me alone, Andrew shook his head. She carries enormous strength inside. 2 months passed, Faith was recovering. Her hair began to grow back again, and she could already take walks outside. One morning, she called both Andrew and the groom into her room. I've decided, she said. As soon as I'm fully recovered, we'll have the wedding again. A real one this time. The groom smiled for the first time in weeks. This time, I'll make sure myself that you're healthy.
Andrew laughed, and I'll double check. Faith took both their hands. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have lived to see this day. Half a year later, they stood again beneath an arch. But this time, Faith wore a different dress, light and simple. Guests applauded, some cried, but now these were tears of happiness. Andrew watched it all with a gentle smile. He knew he had done everything he could. But deep inside, he remembered the kidnapper's words, "You're far too curious." The story was over, but the shadow of the past still lingered. And Andrew understood if that shadow returned, he would be ready to fight again. In the finale, Andrew turned directly to the camera, as if speaking to the viewers. And what do you think? Was it right to uncover Faith's secret at any cost? Or should the past be left buried? Write in the comments. Your opinion matters. And with a soft smile, he added, and of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. There's more to come.